The billionaire CEO saw the single-dad waitress feed his autistic son in the rain, and he finally understood what love actually costs. The symphony hall glows gold under chandeliers. A father stands alone on stage, hands raised, facing an orchestra and an audience of strangers. He's wearing a tuxedo someone lent him. His son is somewhere in the audience, watching. 7 years old, nonverbal. The only person in the world who knows who his father really is. The father's hands are shaking not from fear, from memory. Because the last time he stood in front of an orchestra, he was 24 years old, and the world was calling him a genius. That was 12 years ago, in a different country, with a different name, before his wife left, before his family gave him an ultimatum: institutionalize the boy or lose everything. Before he walked away from the only thing he ever loved besides his son. For 6 years, he's been invisible. A waiter. A man who pours water and clears plates and apologizes when someone's meal is late. A man who wakes up at 5 a.m. to cut carrots into perfect squares because that's the only way his son will eat them. A man who hums in the dark when the boy can't sleep, weaving melodies around his sounds, finding music in the space between words his son will never speak. In the front row, the billionaire who fired him 8 weeks ago is watching. Richard Pemberton. The man who mocked him for taking a phone call about his son, who called him unprofessional, who had him escorted out of the restaurant like trash. Pemberton is crying because he finally knows the truth, and it's breaking him. If you believe the measure of a man isn't what he achieves, but what he gives up for the people he loves, stay with this story. Because what you're about to witness will remind you that heroes don't wear capes. They wear aprons. They hum in the rain. They sacrifice in silence. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me, what would you give up for your child? But to understand how we got here to this stage, this moment, this impossible second chance, we need to go back to the beginning. To a rainy Thursday night, a meltdown on a loading dock, and the 5 minutes that changed 2 men's lives forever. Marcus Volkov moved through the dining room like water. Refill the glass before it empties. Clear the plate before the guest notices. Stay low. Stay quiet. Disappear into the rhythm of service. The dinner rush at Callaway's Steakhouse was in full swing. Business people filled the tables, their voices overlapping in a steady hum of deals and laughter. Marcus slid between them, a tall man in a white shirt and black apron, his movements practiced and efficient. He'd worked here for 3 years, long enough that the other servers stopped asking about his life, long enough that the guests never looked at his face. That morning, like every morning, he'd woken at 5. He'd pulled the Tupperware from the fridge and prepared Ilya's meal with the same precision he used every day. Plain white rice, steamed carrots cut into perfect squares, 3 tablespoons of unsweetened applesauce. No variation, no substitutions. Ilya wouldn't eat anything else. His son was 7 years old, small for his age, dark hair that never stayed flat, brown eyes that rarely met anyone else's. Ilya didn't speak. He hummed. He lined up his toy trains in rows that only he understood. He pressed his small hand into Marcus's palm when the world got too loud, and that pressure said everything words couldn't. After breakfast, Marcus walked Ilya to school. 3 blocks. Ilya counted the cracks in the sidewalk under his breath, the numbers coming out like a chant. Marcus held his hand the whole way. At the school gate, he crouched down and hummed 3 notes. Ilya hummed them back. Their goodbye. Then Marcus went to work. He poured water and carried plates and smiled when tips were good. He picked Ilya up at 3. They went home to the studio apartment in Beacon Hill, where Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, watched the boy until Marcus's evening shift started. Mrs. Chen was 72 and patient. She didn't mind that Ilya didn't talk. She sat with him while he hummed and built his trains into long, winding patterns on the kitchen floor. Marcus moved through the world this way, quietly, deliberately, a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Tonight, the private dining room in the back of Calloway's was set for 20, Richard Pemberton's party. The manager had been tense all afternoon, triple-checking the wine selection and the table arrangement. Pemberton was one of their biggest clients, a billionaire, CEO of something Marcus didn't pay attention to. The kind of man who expected perfection and noticed every flaw. Marcus was assigned to the room. He pushed through the door at 6 sharp, carrying the tray of water glasses. The guests were already seated, men and women in expensive suits, their watches catching the light. Pemberton sat at the head of the table, 50-something, sharp features, graying at the temples. He spoke in clipped sentences, his voice carrying authority even when he laughed. Marcus set down the glasses without a sound. He took orders. He moved between the kitchen and the dining room, bringing appetizers, refilling wine, clearing plates. The guests barely noticed him. Pemberton didn't look at him once. Service was smooth. Marcus worked the way he always did. Invisible. Then, midway through the main course, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Guests weren't supposed to see servers checking phones. But it vibrated again. Then again. Marcus's chest tightened. Mrs. Chen never called unless something was wrong. He slipped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls. He dialed back. Mrs. Chen answered on the first ring. Her voice was high and shaking. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. He won't stop. I tried everything." In the background, Marcus heard it. Ilya's hum, low and repeating. The distress sound. What happened? Marcus kept his voice steady. "I don't know. He was fine." Then he just started rocking. "I tried the trains. I tried the music. He won't calm down." Marcus closed his eyes. He could picture it. Ilya on the floor, rocking back and forth, hands over his ears, the hum rising from somewhere deep in his chest. "Put the phone near him," Marcus said. He heard rustling. Then Ilya's hum, clearer now. Marcus matched the pitch. He hummed it back through the phone, then wove a second note around it, a harmony. Then a third, building a structure, giving the sound a place to land. The rocking slowed in the background. "Keep doing what you're doing," Marcus told Mrs. Chen. "I'll be home as soon as I can." He hung up. His hands were shaking. He took a breath and stepped back into the dining room. Pemberton was staring at the doorway, waiting. Marcus crossed the room. He picked up the wine bottle to refill glasses. His hand trembled slightly as he poured. "Excuse me." Pemberton's voice cut through the conversation. The table went quiet. Marcus turned. "Yes, sir. You were gone for 2 minutes. I apologize. I won't happen again." Pemberton leaned back in his chair. His eyes were cold. "If you can't handle your personal life, find a job where it doesn't matter." The words landed like a slap. The guests shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. No one looked at Marcus. "I'm very sorry, sir." Marcus's voice came out barely above a whisper. Pemberton waved a hand. Dismissal. Marcus stepped back and finished pouring the wine. His hands shook so badly he almost spilled. He moved through the rest of service on autopilot, his mind 3 miles away in a studio apartment where his son was humming and rocking and needing him. At 9, the party finally ended. Marcus cleared the last plates, ran the credit card, and clocked out without speaking to anyone. He grabbed his jacket from the break room and pushed through the back exit into the alley. He needed to get home. He needed to get to Ilya. But when the door swung open, he stopped. Mrs. Chen was standing in the alley, and beside her, sitting on the wet loading dock steps in the rain, was his son. The rain was cold and heavy. It drummed against the metal dumpsters and pooled in the broken asphalt. Marcus stood in the doorway, staring. Ilya sat on the loading dock steps. His small body rocked forward and back. Forward and back. His clothes were soaked through. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his sleeves. He was humming, low and steady. The sound Marcus knew meant distress. Mrs. Chen stood beside him, wringing her hands. Her face was pale. She looked up as Marcus stepped into the alley. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracked. "I tried everything. The trains, the music, nothing worked. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I brought him here, it's okay." Marcus's voice came out steadier than he felt. "You did the right thing." He crossed the alley in 4 steps. The rain soaked through his white shirt immediately. He didn't care. He dropped to his knees in front of Ilya, water seeping through his black pants. Ilya didn't look at him. He kept rocking, kept humming. His eyes were fixed on the wet pavement. Marcus pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around his son's shoulders. The fabric was already damp, but it was something. He stayed low, his face level with Ilya's, and listened to the hum. It was in D minor, the distress key. Ilya always hummed in D minor when the world got too big. Marcus took a breath. Then he started humming too. He matched Ilya's pitch exactly, note for note. The same rhythm, the same intensity. For 10 seconds he just mirrored the sound, letting Ilya know he heard it, that he understood. Then Marcus shifted. He kept the same note but added a harmony above it. A third, then a fifth, building a structure around Ilya's hum, giving it a place to rest. The rocking slowed, just slightly. Marcus wove in a counter-melody, gentle, rising and falling like a breath. The kind of line a cello might play. He kept it simple, 3 notes that repeated, then resolved back into Ilya's original hum. Ilya's shoulders dropped. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, loosened. Marcus added one more layer, a descending line that wrapped around everything else like a lullaby. His voice was soft but clear, cutting through the rain and the traffic noise from the street beyond. Ilya's breathing changed, slower, deeper. His body leaned forward, and Marcus caught him, pulling him close. Ilya's forehead pressed against Marcus's shoulder. The humming continued, but quieter now, softer. Marcus kept singing. He rocked with Ilya, their bodies moving together in the rain. The alley smelled like wet concrete and garbage and exhaust fumes, but none of that mattered. There was only the sound, the structure, the connection. Mrs. Chen stood a few feet away, her hand over her mouth. Tears ran down her face. Marcus didn't know how long they sat there. 2 minutes. 5. Time didn't move the way it usually did when Ilya needed him. But eventually the boy's humming faded. His body went soft. He pressed his small hand against Marcus's chest and left it there. Marcus kissed the top of his head. "I've got you," he whispered. A sound came from behind them. A footstep. Marcus turned. Richard Pemberton stood in the doorway 15 feet away. He was holding his phone. His expression was unreadable. The light from inside the restaurant cast his shadow across the wet alley. Marcus froze. His arms tightened around Ilya. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain fell between them. The hum of traffic filled the silence. Pemberton's jaw worked. He opened his mouth as if to speak. Then he closed it. He looked at Marcus, then at Ilya, then back at Marcus. Something crossed his face. Something Marcus couldn't name. It looked almost like pain. Then Pemberton turned. He walked back through the doorway and disappeared into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind him. Marcus exhaled. He looked down at Ilya. The boy's eyes were half closed. His breathing was even. "Marcus." Mrs. Chen stepped closer. "I'm so sorry. I should have. It's not your fault." Marcus stood, lifting Ilya with him. The boy was heavy in his arms, but Marcus had carried him like this 1,000 times. "Thank you for bringing him." Mrs. Chen stepped closer. Chen nodded. She reached out and touched Ilya's wet hair. Is he okay? He will be. Marcus carried his son out of the alley and onto the sidewalk. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. He walked slowly, keeping Ilya close, his jacket still wrapped around the boy's shoulders. Behind them, in the parking lot of Callaway's, Richard Pemberton sat alone in his car. His hands gripped the steering wheel. He stared through the windshield at nothing. The key was in the ignition. He didn't turn it. The sound he'd just heard wouldn't leave his head. The waiter's voice, the way he'd built harmony out of a child's distress, the tenderness, the precision, the way the boy had softened under his father's song. Pemberton's daughter used to do that. Near the end, when the morphine wasn't enough and the nurses had run out of things to try, he'd play music for her, orchestral pieces, slow movements. Mahler, to Tchaikovsky, Barber's Adagio for strings. She'd close her eyes and her breathing would slow, and for a few minutes the pain would recede. He hadn't listened to music since the day she died. Not once in 3 years. Couldn't stand it. Every note reminded him of the hospital room and the machines and the smell of antiseptic and the way her small hand had gone cold in his. But tonight, in that alley, he'd heard something different, something raw and real and alive. A father singing to his son in the rain. No instruments, no recording. Just a human voice, holding another human being together. Pemberton's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the steering wheel. What had he done to that man? He sat in the dark car for 20 minutes. The rain drummed on the roof. The parking lot emptied. The restaurant lights dimmed. Finally, he reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for his head of security. The man answered on the second ring. "I need you to find out everything about someone," Pemberton said. His voice was hoarse. Everything. Marcus arrived at Callaway's at 10 the next morning. Early. He wanted to apologize to the manager before the lunch shift started. Maybe explain. Maybe smooth things over. The manager was waiting in his office. "Close the door," he said. Marcus did. He stood with his hands folded, shoulders squared, ready to take whatever was coming. The manager didn't look at him. He shuffled papers on his desk, straightened a pen, cleared his throat. "I got a call this morning," he said, "from Mr. Pemberton." Marcus's chest tightened. He wasn't happy about last night. Said your personal disruption reflected poorly on the restaurant. Said it was unprofessional. "I understand. It won't happen again." The manager finally looked up. His expression was tired. "Marcus, I don't have a choice here. Pemberton is one of our biggest clients. He brings in corporate parties every month. Last night alone was a $15,000 booking." Marcus's hands went cold. "I'm letting you go. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air. Marcus tried to process them. Let go. Fired. For answering a phone call about his son. "I need this job," Marcus said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry. My son has therapy appointments. I have rent due." The manager opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. "This is your final paycheck. $340. It covers through yesterday." He slid the envelope across the desk. Marcus stared at it. $340. Rent was $1,200. Ilya's therapy was $200 per session. 3 sessions this month. "You're escorting me out," Marcus said. "Company policy." Marcus took the envelope. His hands didn't shake. Not yet. He walked out of the office, through the kitchen where the morning prep cooks looked away, through the dining room where the tables were still empty, and out the front door onto the street. The manager followed him the whole way, making sure he left. Marcus stood on the sidewalk. The morning was bright and cold. People walked past him, heading to work, carrying coffee, talking on phones. The city moved around him like he wasn't there. He rode the bus home. 40 minutes. He sat in the back and stared out the window. The envelope was in his jacket pocket. He could feel its weight. The studio apartment was quiet when he got back. Mrs. Chen wouldn't bring Ilya until 3. Marcus locked the door behind him and sat down at the small kitchen table. He opened his laptop. The screen glowed in the dim light. He searched for restaurant jobs. Line cook, dishwasher, server. Every application asked the same question. Reference from current employer? He had none. Pemberton had made sure of that. He calculated the numbers. Rent was due in 8 days. $1,200, 3 therapy sessions, $600 total. Food for the month. $200 if he was careful. He had $340 in his pocket. He was short $1,600. He could call the landlord, ask for an extension. But he'd done that twice already this year. He could skip Ilya's therapy, but the sessions were helping. Ilya was making progress. Small things. Eye contact. Longer moments of calm. Marcus couldn't take that away from him. He closed the laptop, pressed his palms against his eyes, took a breath. The door opened at 3. Mrs. Chen brought Ilya in, the boy's backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked at Marcus, her face creased with worry. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Thank you for picking him up." She hesitated. "Marcus." "I'm fine." She left. Marcus locked the door and turned to his son. Ilya stood in the entryway, hands at his sides, humming softly, the same 3 notes he always hummed when he came home. A greeting. A way of saying the day was over and he was safe now. Marcus knelt down. "Hey, buddy." Ilya didn't look at him. He stepped past Marcus and went to his corner. He pulled out his trains and started lining them up. Red engine, blue boxcar, green caboose. Always the same order. Marcus went to the kitchen. He pulled out the Tupperware. Rice, carrots, applesauce. His hands shook as he scooped the rice into the bowl. He cut the carrots into squares, perfect edges. Ilya wouldn't eat them otherwise. He set the bowl on the table. Ilya came over and sat down. He ate slowly, methodically. 1 bite of rice, 1 square of carrot, 1 spoonful of applesauce. The pattern repeated until the bowl was empty. Marcus sat on the floor beside him. He watched Ilya return to his trains. The boy picked up each one, examined it, set it down in the line. His humming filled the small apartment, soft and steady, the sound that meant everything was okay. Marcus didn't know how to tell him it wasn't. He sat there until the light outside faded. Ilya played. The trains moved along invisible tracks. The humming continued. Marcus's mind circled the same numbers. 1,200, 600, 200, 340, 1,600 short. He couldn't ask Mrs. Chen for help. She lived on Social Security. He had no family in Seattle, no friends. He'd been too busy working and raising Ilya to build a life outside of survival. He looked at his son, 7 years old. Small for his age, dark hair that never stayed flat, brown eyes that rarely met anyone else's. Ilya needed routine, needed stability, needed his therapy and his trains, and his father there when he came home from school. Marcus didn't know how to give him that anymore. Night fell. Marcus put Ilya to bed in the alcove that served as his bedroom. He pulled the blanket up to the boy's chin. Ilya's eyes were already closed. His breathing was even. The humming had stopped. Marcus kissed his forehead. "I've got you," he whispered. Across the city, in a penthouse office 40 floors above the street, Richard Pemberton sat alone. The lights of Seattle spread out beneath him. His desk was polished wood. His chair was leather. Everything in the room was expensive and cold. He couldn't stop thinking about the waiter in the rain, the way the man had knelt beside his son, the way he'd built harmony out of a child's distress, the tenderness, the precision, the love that radiated from every note. Pemberton had fired him for that. For being a father. He picked up his phone. stared at it, put it down, picked it up again. Finally, he dialed. His head of security answered on the second ring. "I need you to find out everything about someone," Pemberton said. His voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat. "His name is Marcus Volkov. He's a waiter. Or he was. I need to know who he is, where he came from. Everything." 2 days later, the investigator arrived at Pemberton's office with a manila folder. "Marcus Volkov," the man said, setting it on the desk. 36 years old. Been in Seattle for 6 years. Employment history is straightforward. Waiter at Callaway's for 3 years. Before that, line cook at a diner in Renton. Before that, dishwasher at a hotel downtown. Pemberton opened the folder. Pages of records, tax returns, paycheck stubs. An address in Beacon Hill. A son named Ilya, age 7, enrolled at Beacon Hill Elementary. "That's it," Pemberton said. "There's a gap," the investigator said. "Before 6 years ago, nothing. No work history, no rental history, no credit cards. It's like he didn't exist. Everyone exists somewhere." I dug deeper. Found an immigration record. Marcus Belinsky, Russian national. Entered the U.S. on a visa in August 2020 with a dependent child. Applied for a name change 6 months later. Marcus Volkov. Pemberton looked up. "Belinsky? Means something to you?" Pemberton didn't answer. He stared at the name. Marcus Belinsky. It did mean something. He didn't know why. The investigator left. Pemberton sat alone in his office. The city lights glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was past midnight. His assistant had gone home hours ago. The building was silent. He opened his laptop and typed the name into the search bar. Marcus Belinsky, conductor. The results filled the screen. The first link was a video. Mariinsky Theater, St. Petersburg, 2017. Pemberton clicked it. The video loaded. A concert hall, red velvet seats, gold balconies, a full orchestra on stage, and at the center, on the podium, stood a young man, 24, maybe 25, tall, dark hair, sharp features. He wore a black suit and held a baton in his right hand. The camera zoomed in. The young man raised his hands. The orchestra went silent. Then he began. Pemberton leaned closer to the screen. The conductor's movements were precise, controlled. Every gesture meant something. His left hand shaped the sound. His right hand drove the tempo. The orchestra responded like they were extensions of his body. The music was Shostakovich. Pemberton recognized it. Dark and urgent. The strings climbed in intensity. The brass punctuated. The conductor pulled it all together, his face focused, his movements growing larger as the piece built toward its climax. Then, at the peak, he brought it down. A single gesture. The orchestra softened. The music became fragile. The conductor's hands moved slowly now, almost tenderly, coaxing something beautiful from the chaos. Pemberton's chest tightened. The piece ended. The audience erupted. The young conductor bowed. He looked exhausted, exhilarated, alive. Pemberton paused the video. He stared at the frozen image of the young man on the podium. Then he looked at the date, March 12, 2017. He searched again. Found articles, profiles, reviews. Marcus Belinsky, 23, is the youngest conductor ever admitted to the Moscow Conservatory's graduate program, a once-in-a-generation talent with the technical precision of Gurdjieff and the emotional depth of Bernstein. Belinsky's interpretation of Shostakovich's reconstructed fragments was nothing short of revelatory. Pemberton scrolled through years of articles. Performances in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Berlin. Always the same praise, always the same prediction. This man would become one of the great conductors of his generation. Then, abruptly, the article stopped. The last mention was from 2019, a brief note in a Russian music journal. Conductor Marcus Belinsky has withdrawn from his scheduled appearances at the Moscow Philharmonic, no reason given. After that, nothing. Pemberton sat back in his chair. He looked at the time. 2 in the morning. His office was dark except for the glow of his laptop screen. He watched the video again. Then again. Each time he saw something new. The way the conductor's hands moved. The way he listened. The way he shaped sound into something that mattered. And then Pemberton remembered. The alley. The rain. The waiter kneeling beside his son. The humming. The way he'd built harmony out of a child's distress with the same precision, the same instinct, the same impossible gift. It was the same man. Pemberton closed his laptop. He pressed his palms against his eyes. His hands were shaking. He'd fired Marcus Belinsky, a prodigy, a legend. A man who'd walked away from everything to raise a son the world told him to abandon. Pemberton knew that story. He'd lived a version of it. When Claire was dying, the doctors told him to keep working, that it was healthy, that routine would help, that he needed to maintain normalcy for his own sanity. So he did. He kept taking meetings, kept closing deals, kept pretending that control mattered more than presence. He wasn't there when she said her last words. He was in a conference room 40 floors above the hospital, negotiating terms on an acquisition that made him another $100 million. He'd chosen wrong, and Marcus had chosen right. Pemberton stood. He grabbed his coat and walked out of his office. The parking garage was empty. His car sat under a fluorescent light, gleaming and cold. He drove through the city. The streets were quiet. A few cars, a few pedestrians. The Space Needle rose against the night sky, lit up and distant. He found the address in Beacon Hill, a small apartment building. Old brick. Peeling paint. A row of mailboxes by the front door. He parked across the street. Sat in his car. Stared at the building. What was he going to say? "I'm sorry I fired you. I'm sorry I humiliated you in front of my guests. I'm sorry I destroyed your life because you dared to love your son." None of it was enough. The sky began to lighten. Dawn crept over the buildings. A few lights came on in windows, the city waking up. Pemberton got out of the car. He crossed the street. He stood in front of the building's entrance and looked up at the windows. He didn't know which one was Marcus's. He took a breath. He rehearsed what he'd say, but every version sounded hollow. Finally, he pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. The name beside it read, Volkov. No answer. He pressed it again. Waited. His pulse thudded in his ears. The speaker crackled. A voice. Quiet. Guarded. Yes? Pemberton's throat went dry. He knew he should apologize through the intercom, explain why he was here. But the words wouldn't come. "Mr. Volkov," he finally said, "my name is Richard Pemberton. I need to speak with you." Silence. Long enough that Pemberton thought the connection had cut. Then, "I know who you are." "I know. I know you do. Please, just 5 minutes." More silence. "I have nothing to say to you." "I understand. But I have something to say to you, please." The speaker went dead. Pemberton stood on the sidewalk, waiting. He didn't know if Marcus would come down or call the police or simply leave him standing there. Then the door buzzed. Unlocked. Pemberton pulled it open and stepped inside, knowing he was about to face the man whose life he'd destroyed, and knowing there was no way to make it right. Pemberton climbed the narrow stairwell to the 3rd floor. The building smelled like old carpet and someone's breakfast. The walls were scuffed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He found apartment 3B and knocked. Footsteps inside. A pause. Then the door opened 6 inches. A chain lock stretched across the gap. Marcus stood on the other side. He looked worse than he had 5 days ago. Dark circles under his eyes. Unshaved. A worn t-shirt and jeans. He stared at Pemberton without speaking. "Mr. Volkov," Pemberton said, "thank you for letting me up." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I didn't let you up. I buzzed the door because I want you to say what you came to say and then leave." "That's fair. You have 5 minutes." Marcus started to close the door. Pemberton put his hand against it, not pushing, just stopping it from closing. "Please," Pemberton said, "just let me inside. I don't want to do this in the hallway." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he unhooked the chain and stepped back. The apartment was small, one room that served as kitchen, living room, and bedroom. A narrow alcove in the corner where a child's bed sat beside a shelf of toy trains. The place was spotless but worn. The furniture looked second-hand. The walls were bare except for a calendar marked with therapy appointments. Ilya sat on the floor near the window. He was lining up trains. Red engine, blue boxcar, green caboose. He hummed quietly as he worked. He didn't look up when Pemberton entered. Marcus closed the door behind them. He didn't offer Pemberton a seat. He stood with his arms crossed, waiting. Pemberton took a breath. "I know who you are." Marcus said nothing. "I know your real name, Marcus Belinsky. I know you conducted at the Mariinsky Theater. I know you were called the next Gurdjieff. I know you disappeared 6 years ago." Marcus's expression didn't change. And I know what I did to you," Pemberton said. His voice dropped. "I fired a father for loving his son. I destroyed your life because you answered a phone call." "Yes, you did." The words were quiet, precise, no anger in them, just fact. Pemberton's chest tightened. "I came here to apologize, and to offer you something." "I don't want your apology." "I know, but I'm giving it anyway." Pemberton paused. "I'm sorry for what I said, for what I did. I was wrong." Marcus looked at him. His eyes were steady. "You said you had an offer." Pemberton nodded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. He set it on the small kitchen table. "The Crestline Foundation is hosting a gala in 8 weeks. We've commissioned a memorial piece. We need a conductor." Marcus glanced at the folder but didn't touch it. "You have hundreds of conductors in this city. I want you." "Why?" Pemberton hesitated. He looked at Ilya humming on the floor, then back at Marcus. "Because I watched you with your son, in the rain, the way you hummed to him, the way you built harmony around his sound. It was—" Pemberton's voice caught. "It was the most beautiful thing I've heard in 3 years." Marcus's expression shifted, just slightly. The hardness in his eyes softened. "My daughter died," Pemberton said quietly. "Claire. She was 9. Leukemia. At the end, music was the only thing that reached her. I'd play recordings for her, Mahler, Tchaikovsky, Barber's Adagio. She'd close her eyes and the pain would fade for a little while." He paused. The apartment was silent except for Ilya's humming. "I haven't been able to listen to music since she died," Pemberton continued. "Not once. It hurt too much. But that night, in the alley, I heard something different. I heard what music is supposed to be. Not performance, not perfection. Just connection." Marcus looked away. His jaw worked. "The gala is in 8 weeks," Pemberton said. "I'll pay you $50,000 for one performance. Full creative control, no obligations beyond that. The contract is in the folder." He stepped toward the door. Then he stopped and turned back. "My daughter would have wanted me to do better," he said. "So I'm trying." Marcus opened the folder. He read the first page. His hands trembled slightly. He set it down. I haven't conducted in 6 years. I know. My hands shake. I don't know if I can still do it. I think you can. Marcus looked at Pemberton. Why do you think that? Because you didn't stop being who you were. You just stopped showing it. Pemberton paused. What you did in that alley wasn't just a father calming his son. It was a conductor building a piece of music out of nothing. The same instinct, the same gift. Marcus picked up the folder again. He flipped through the pages. Contract terms. Payment schedule. Contact information for the composer and orchestra manager. $50,000. Enough to cover rent. Therapy. Food. Enough to breathe for a few months. But the thought of standing in front of an orchestra again made his chest tighten. 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of pretending that part of him didn't exist. He looked at Ilya. The boy was still lining up his trains, oblivious to the conversation happening behind him. His small hands moved with precision. Red engine. Blue boxcar. Green caboose. Always the same order. Marcus thought about the therapy bills stacked on the counter. The rent notice taped to the fridge, the job applications he'd sent that went unanswered. He thought about Ilya's progress, the small breakthroughs, the moments when his son's hand would find his and squeeze, the way Ilya's face lit up when Marcus hummed the right notes. He couldn't give that up, not for pride, not for fear. He looked at Pemberton. I'll do it. Pemberton's shoulders dropped, relief washed over his face. Thank you. But I don't trust you, Marcus said. And I don't forgive you. This is business, nothing more. I understand. Marcus signed the contract. His handwriting was shaky. He tore off the copy and handed the original to Pemberton. Pemberton took it. He hesitated at the door. I can't give you back what you lost, but maybe I can give you a reason to remember why you loved it. He left. The door closed behind him. His footsteps faded down the hallway. Marcus stood in the middle of his small apartment, staring at the paperwork in his hands. $50,000 for one performance. 8 weeks to remember how to do something he'd spent 6 years trying to forget. He sat down on the floor beside Ilya. The boy glanced at him, then went back to his trains. Marcus watched him for a long time, watched the careful way he lined them up. The hum that never stopped, the peace in his small face. Marcus had chosen this life, chosen Ilya over everything else. He'd walked away from orchestras and concert halls, and the career everyone said he was born for. He'd done it willingly. He'd do it again. But now, holding the contract in his shaking hands, he realized he was about to step back into the world he'd left behind. And he had no idea if that world would let him in or destroy him for trying. The rehearsal hall smelled like old wood and rosin. Marcus stood in the doorway, staring at the empty stage. The podium waited at the center. Behind it, rows of music stands and chairs. Light poured through high windows, turning dust particles into tiny floating stars. 3 weeks until the gala? 3 weeks to remember how to do this. Mr. Volkov? Marcus turned. A young woman approached from the wings, mid-20s, dark hair pulled back. She carried a folder of sheet music and looked as nervous as he felt. I'm Elena Sharp, she said. The composer. Mr. Pemberton said you'd be conducting my piece. Marcus shook her hand. Yes. I've never worked with a conductor who came from... She trailed off. Service work? Marcus said quietly. I was going to say Russia. Her smile was tight. Pemberton told me about your background. The Mariinsky Theater. That's incredible. It was a long time ago. 6 years isn't that long. Marcus didn't answer. 6 years felt like a lifetime. The orchestra began arriving. 20 musicians. Session players who'd done 100 galas like this one. They unpacked instruments, tuned, chatted. They glanced at Marcus. He saw the doubt in their eyes. The orchestra manager, A thin man with silver hair clapped his hands. "All right, everyone. This is Marcus Volkov. He'll be conducting Elena's commission. Let's keep this professional and efficient." Marcus stepped onto the stage. The walk to the podium felt impossibly long. He climbed the 3 steps, turned to face the orchestra. 70 eyes stared back at him. His hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the podium, took a breath, looked down at the score. Elena's piece was modern, angular, lots of sharp rhythms and dissonant harmonies, technically challenging. The kind of music that required absolute precision from both the conductor and the players. Marcus raised his hands. The baton felt foreign in his grip, heavier than he remembered. Or maybe his hands had just forgotten how to hold it. "From measure 12, he said. His voice was too quiet. Half the orchestra didn't hear him. The concertmaster, a woman in her 40s with graying blonde hair, looked up. "Can you speak louder?" Marcus cleared his throat. "From measure 12. He gave the downbeat. It was wrong. The motion was stiff, uncertain. The violins came in a beat too late. The cellos rushed. The brass section watched him, confused about when to enter. Marcus tried to fix it. He gestured more aggressively. But his hands weren't communicating what he wanted. The music lurched forward, disjointed and messy. The concertmaster stopped playing. Then the others. The hall went quiet. "Can we start again?" she asked. "What tempo are you looking for?" Marcus's mouth went dry. He knew the tempo. He could hear it in his head. But he couldn't translate it into a gesture that made sense. 120, he said. "You were conducting at 90. "I know. I meant 120. They tried again, and again. Each time, something fell apart. The musicians grew more frustrated. Marcus's hands shook harder. His directions became vaguer. He could feel himself losing them. After the 4th attempt, the orchestra manager called a break. The musicians set down their instruments and left the stage. Some of them whispered to each other. Marcus didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. Elena approached the podium. She looked worried. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Maybe we could simplify the rhythms in the 3rd section. Make it easier too." "It's not the piece," Marcus said. "It's me." She didn't argue. The second half of the rehearsal went worse. Marcus tried to assert more authority, but his voice cracked. He tried to demonstrate what he wanted, but his hands wouldn't obey. By the time they finished, the musicians were barely following him. They were playing by instinct, ignoring his gestures, finding their own way through the score. Afterward, the orchestra manager pulled Marcus aside in the hallway. "We need to talk." "I know. The musicians don't trust you. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can tell when an orchestra respects a conductor. This isn't it." Marcus nodded. His chest felt hollow. "If this continues," the manager said, "they're going to request a replacement. I'll try to buy you some time, but you need to figure this out, fast." Marcus drove home in silence. The city moved past his windows. Traffic lights. Pedestrians. The normal world going about its normal business. He felt like he was watching it from behind glass. At the apartment, Mrs. Chen left as soon as he arrived. Ilya was on the floor with his trains. Red engine, blue boxcar, green caboose. The same pattern. Always the same. Marcus stood in the middle of the room. He looked at the mirror hanging on the bathroom door. He positioned himself in front of it. He raised his hands, tried to remember what it felt like. The weight of an orchestra waiting. The score in his mind, the music flowing through his gestures. But all he saw was a man who'd forgotten how to do the one thing he'd once been brilliant at. He started conducting anyway. No music, just movement. His reflection stared back at him. Behind him, Ilya began to hum. Marcus stopped. He turned around. Ilya was still lining up his trains, but the humming had changed. It wasn't random. It was following a melody. The melody from Elena's piece. The theme that appeared in the second movement. Marcus moved his hands again. Different section. Different rhythm. Ilya's humming shifted. He followed the new pattern. Not all of it, just certain fragments. The moments where the strings played that descending line. The moments where the woodwinds came in soft and sweet. Marcus stopped conducting. He knelt down beside his son. Ilya didn't look at him. He kept arranging his trains. But the humming continued. Marcus hummed back. The same fragment. The same notes. Ilya's head turned slightly. Just a few degrees. Not eye contact. Not quite. But acknowledgement. Marcus hummed again. This time he added harmony. Built a structure around the melody. Ilya stopped moving his trains. He listened. Then he hummed the original line again. Louder now. More confident. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus remembered why music mattered. Not because it was perfect, not because critics praised it, not because it filled concert halls, because it connected, because it spoke when words couldn't, because it let his son, who couldn't say I love you or I'm scared or I need you, say I'm here, I hear you, we're together. Marcus stood up. He went to his laptop and found Elena's email address. He typed slowly. Can we adjust the arrangement? I'd like to emphasize certain melodic fragments in the second movement, the moments where the strings carry the theme. I can send you specific measure numbers. Let me know if you're open to changes. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 3 minutes later, Elena replied. I'm confused. Why those specific moments? Marcus looked at Ilya. His son was humming again, soft and steady. Because those are the parts that matter most, Marcus typed. He didn't explain. He didn't know how to. But somewhere in the fragments his son had heard, somewhere in the melodies that cut through noise and fear and isolation, Marcus had found what he'd been searching for. Not perfection. Connection. The boardroom on the 40th floor overlooked the city. Glass and steel. Polished mahogany table. Leather chairs. Pemberton sat at the head, his hands folded in front of him. 8 board members stared back at him. Their expressions ranged from concern to barely concealed anger. We have a problem, said Margaret Chen, the vice chair. She was 70, sharp-eyed, and had been on the board for 20 years. This conductor you hired, Marcus Volkov. What about him? Pemberton said. He's a waiter. No recent credentials, no established reputation. The gala is in 2 weeks, and we're trusting him with a $10 million fundraiser. I'm trusting him. Yes. Another board member leaned forward. David something. Pemberton couldn't remember his last name. Richard, this isn't personal charity. This is the Foundation's flagship event. Donors expect excellence. They'll get it. How do you know that? Margaret asked. Have you attended his rehearsals? Pemberton hadn't. He'd stayed away deliberately, not wanting to add pressure. But he'd gotten updates from the orchestra manager. The rehearsals were improving. Marcus was finding his footing. The orchestra manager says he's capable, Pemberton said. Capable isn't enough. Margaret slid a folder across the table. We've identified 3 established conductors who are available. Any one of them could step in. We'd still have time to promote their involvement and secure additional donations. Pemberton opened the folder. 3 names. 3 resumes. All impressive. All safe. He closed it. No. Richard, this performance happens as planned. Marcus Volkov conducts. Margaret's voice hardened. Then we're calling a vote. The board has the authority to override the chair's decisions when the Foundation's interests are at stake. You're going to vote me out over this? If necessary. Pemberton looked around the table. Some board members avoided his eyes. Others nodded in agreement with Margaret. He stood, pushed his chair back. Then let me make this simple. If you remove Marcus Volkov as conductor, I withdraw my entire endowment, every dollar. Effective immediately. The table went quiet. You're bluffing, David said. Try me. Margaret's jaw tightened. Richard, you've put $20 million into this foundation over the last 5 years. You'd walk away from that? Yes. Why? Pemberton thought about the alley, the rain, the sound of a father humming to his son. He thought about his own daughter and the years he'd wasted chasing money instead of sitting beside her bed. Because this matters more, he said. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. 2 days later, the story leaked. A music blog picked it up first. Billionaire's mystery conductor, genius or disaster. By the afternoon, it was everywhere. Twitter. Classical music forums. Industry newsletters. The narrative was irresistible. Richard Pemberton, ruthless CEO, gambling the foundation's reputation on a waiter with a 6-year gap in his career. Was it philanthropy or arrogance? Redemption or recklessness? Elena Sharp started getting calls that evening. Colleagues, former professors, people she respected. All of them said the same thing. This project would damage her career. She was young. She had promise. She shouldn't attach her name to something that might become a public embarrassment. She tried to ignore them, but the calls kept coming. On the 3rd day, she emailed Marcus. I'm sorry. I can't continue with this project. Please understand, it's not about you. It's about protecting my future. I hope you find another composer. Best, Elena. Marcus read the email 3 times. He sat at his kitchen table in the dark. Ilya was asleep in the alcove. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. 12 days until the gala. No piece to conduct. His phone rang. Pemberton. Did you see Elena's email? Pemberton's voice was rough. Yes. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. The board, the press, I should have handled it better. Marcus looked at the calendar on the wall. 12 days. We can cancel, Pemberton said. I'll issue a statement. I'll take full responsibility. You won't be blamed for any of this. No, Marcus, I'll write something myself. Silence on the other end. Then, in 12 days? Yes, that's impossible. Maybe. Pemberton's breath came through the phone. You're serious. I'm serious. What do you need from me? Nothing. Just don't cancel. Marcus hung up. He opened his laptop, pulled up a blank notation program, stared at the empty measures. He hadn't written music in 6 years, hadn't even thought about composition since Moscow. But the melody was already in his head, the one he'd hummed to Ilya in the rain, the one his son had responded to. He started writing. The next week was a blur. Marcus slept in 2-hour shifts. He wrote through the night while Ilya slept. During the day, when Ilya was at school, Marcus kept writing. Mrs. Chen brought groceries. Marcus barely noticed. The piece took shape slowly. 12 minutes, 3 movements, built around a single recurring motif, the melody from the loading dock. Simple and pure. The first movement introduced it in the strings. The second deconstructed it, breaking it into fragments, scattering it across the orchestra. The third brought it back together, building to a climax, then resolving into the simplest version, just a solo cello, playing the original hum. Marcus worked with the mathematical precision he'd learned at the conservatory. Every note had a purpose. Every dynamic marking mattered, but underneath the technique was something rawer. 6 years of raising Ilya alone, 6 years of humming in the dark, 6 years of trying to be heard. He titled it Song for the Unheard. 4 days before the gala, Marcus finished. He sent the score to the orchestra manager with a brief note. This is the piece we'll perform. Please distribute to the musicians." That night, across the city, the concertmaster received her copy. She was in her apartment, a glass of wine on the table. She'd planned to glance through it quickly, just to get a sense of the technical challenges. She opened the PDF, started reading. 20 minutes later, she was still reading. She'd forgotten about the wine. She played through the piece in her head, hearing each line, each harmony, the way the motif threaded through the movements like a voice calling out and finally being answered. The final page showed the solo cello part, just the melody, alone, exposed. The concertmaster set down the score. Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them away. She picked up her phone and called the orchestra manager. "We have to play this," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Whatever it takes, we have to play this exactly the way he wrote it." The symphony hall glowed gold under the chandeliers. 2,000 seats filled with black-tie guests. Diamonds caught the light. Conversations hummed through the space like bees in a garden. Marcus stood backstage in a borrowed tuxedo. The jacket was slightly too big in the shoulders. The bow tie felt like it was strangling him. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see the front rows. Pemberton's board sat together, faces unreadable. Music journalists held programs, pens ready. Seattle's wealthiest families occupied the center orchestra section, expecting excellence they'd paid for. The orchestra manager appeared at Marcus's elbow, a thin man with silver hair and kind eyes. "The musicians ran through your score this afternoon," he said quietly. Marcus's throat tightened. "And they want to play it. Every single one of them." The manager paused. "They said it's the most honest piece they've read in years." Marcus nodded. He couldn't speak. "You're going to be fine," the manager said. "Trust yourself." Marcus stepped into the wings. The stage stretched before him, impossibly bright. The orchestra was already seated. 70 musicians. Instruments tuned. Eyes forward. Waiting. From the front row, Richard Pemberton looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. Pemberton nodded once. Steady. Certain. Marcus took a breath. Stepped onto the stage. The applause was polite. Uncertain. The sound of an audience withholding judgment. Marcus walked to the podium. Each step felt like crossing a frozen lake, listening for cracks. He climbed the 3 steps, turned to face the orchestra, picked up the baton. His hands were shaking. He could feel it in his wrists, his fingertips. The baton trembled against his palm. He closed his eyes, thought of Ilya, thought of the rain, thought of the melody he'd built around his son's voice. When he opened his eyes again, the trembling had stopped. Marcus raised his hands. The orchestra lifted their instruments. The hall went silent. 2,000 people holding their breath. His right hand came down, clear, decisive. The downbeat. The violins entered, soft, tentative. The melody that had lived in Marcus's head for 6 years finally given voice. A single line, simple and pure, reaching up like a question. The violas answered. Then the cellos. Building layers. Marcus's left hand shaped the sound, pulling it softer here, letting it swell there. His right hand drove the tempo forward, steady as a heartbeat. The piece unfolded. 12 minutes of music built on a single fragment. The theme appeared in the first movement, innocent and fragile. The second movement pulled it apart, scattering it across the orchestra, woodwinds playing it backward, brass inverting it, strings stretching it thin. Chaos, loss. The sound of something breaking. Marcus conducted with everything he had, every gesture precise, every cue clear. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. This was the language he'd spoken before words, before grief, before silence. The orchestra responded. They weren't just following him, they were with him. Every musician leaning into the music, pulling sounds they didn't know they could make. The brass swelled. The timpani rolled. The piece built toward its climax, all the scattered fragments coming back together, the melody returning in full orchestral voice, triumphant and devastating at once. Then Marcus brought it down. A single gesture. His left hand falling like a leaf. The orchestra softened. The brass dropped out. The woodwinds faded. The strings thinned to just the cellos. Then just one. The solo cellist played the melody as Marcus had written it. The original hum. Ilya's voice. Simple. Unadorned. A child reaching for his father in the rain. The final note hung in the air. The cellist's bow lifted. Silence. Marcus stood on the podium, arms still raised, barely breathing. The hall was completely still. No coughs, no rustling programs, nothing. Then someone stood. Then another. Then the entire audience rose as one. The applause came like a wave, crashing over the stage. Thunderous. Overwhelming. Marcus lowered his arms. He turned to face the hall. People were crying. He could see tears on faces in the front rows. The orchestra was clapping too. The concertmaster was wiping her eyes. She looked at Marcus and mouthed two words. "Thank you." Marcus's vision blurred. He bowed. Once. Twice. The applause continued, rolling through the hall like storm surge. He looked at the orchestra. They were standing now, clapping for him. The musicians who had doubted him, who had watched him fail in that first rehearsal. They were standing and clapping, and some of them were crying too. Marcus turned back to the audience. Found Pemberton in the front row. The man was standing, applauding, tears streaming down his face without shame. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus let himself believe something he'd thought was lost forever. He hadn't lost everything. The music was still there. It had always been there. He'd just been too afraid to reach for it. The applause began to fade. Marcus bowed one final time. He stepped down from the podium, started to walk toward the wings. Then Pemberton moved. He rose from his seat and walked to the side stairs, climbed onto the stage. Someone handed him a microphone. The applause quieted. The audience sat. Pemberton stood at center stage. He looked at Marcus. Then he turned to face the hall. "I need to tell you a story," he said. His voice carried through the space. Clear, steady. The voice of a man who'd made a decision and wouldn't turn back. Marcus stood frozen in the wings. Pemberton looked at him once more, then began to speak. Pemberton stood at center stage. The microphone felt heavy in his hand. 2,000 people waited. Marcus stood frozen in the wings, watching. 8 weeks ago, Pemberton began, I humiliated a man in front of 20 people. I did it because he answered a phone call about his son. I did it because I could. Because I was used to people doing what I wanted without question. The hall was completely silent. The next morning, I had him fired. I told his manager that his personal life was unprofessional, that it reflected poorly on my event. And his manager, terrified of losing my business, complied. Pemberton's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. I destroyed that man's livelihood because he was a father, because he put his child first, and I couldn't stand to watch someone do what I'd failed to do when it mattered most. He paused, looked down, then back at the audience. 3 years ago, my daughter Claire died of leukemia. She was 9 years old. In her final weeks, I kept working. I kept taking meetings. I kept telling myself that providing for her meant more than being with her. I was wrong. I wasn't there when she said her last words. I was in a boardroom, negotiating a deal I can't even remember now. The audience shifted. Some people looked away. Others leaned forward. That night, 8 weeks ago, I went to the back of the restaurant to take a call. And I saw something I'll never forget. I saw that waiter kneeling in the rain beside his son. The boy was having a meltdown, soaking wet, rocking, humming. And this man, this father, he knelt down and hummed with him. Not to quiet him, not to make him stop, but to join him, to meet him where he was. Pemberton's hands tightened on the microphone. He built harmony around his son's sound. He wove a melody through it, and slowly the boy calmed. He leaned into his father, and I stood there watching, and I realized I was seeing something I'd never given my own daughter. Presence, connection, love without condition. A woman in the third row was crying. Others dabbed at their eyes. I fired him the next morning, because I couldn't face what he represented. He showed me everything I'd failed to be. Pemberton turned slightly, looked at Marcus in the wings. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, so I investigated. And I learned that the man I'd fired, the waiter I'd dismissed, was Marcus Belinsky, the youngest conductor ever admitted to the Moscow Conservatory. A prodigy, a legend at 23. Critics called him the next Gurdjieff. He had the world at his feet. A murmur went through the audience. Board members exchanged glances. And he walked away from all of it. Because when his son was born, his family told him to choose the career or the child, greatness or love. He chose love. He came to America with nothing, changed his name, worked in kitchens and dining rooms for 6 years, never touched a baton, never conducted, because his son needed him, and that was enough. Pemberton's voice grew stronger. Tonight you heard the piece he wrote in 12 days, Song for the Unheard. He wrote it when the original composer withdrew under pressure, when my board tried to force me to replace him. When everyone told him he wasn't good enough, he wrote it anyway. And he built it around the melody he hummed to his son in the rain. That solo cello at the end? That was his son's voice. That was love turned into music. The applause began softly. Then it grew. Pemberton raised his hand. I can't give back what I took from him. But I can do something now. The Crestline Foundation is making a $2 million donation to Autism Support Services in Seattle. And we're creating a permanent position. Marcus Volkov will be our first composer in residence. Full funding. Full creative freedom. For as long as he wants it. The audience rose again. The applause was deafening. Marcus stood in the wings, his face wet with tears. Pemberton walked over to him, extended his hand. Marcus took it. "Thank you," Pemberton said quietly. Only Marcus could hear him over the noise. "Thank you for showing me what matters." Marcus nodded. He couldn't speak. The days after the performance blurred together. Video of Marcus's performance went viral. 3 million views in 48 hours. Music journalists wrote articles. NPR called for an interview. The New York Times ran a feature. The Conductor Who Chose His Son. Commissions arrived. Orchestras in Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles. They wanted new pieces. They wanted Marcus Belinsky. The University of Washington called with an offer. Adjunct professor of composition. 3 classes a semester. Schedule flexible. Designed around Ilya's needs. Marcus accepted everything. But he designed it all around the same principle. Ilya came first. Always. Pemberton's board resigned quietly. One by one. Embarrassed by the public response. By the emails flooding the foundation praising Marcus. By the donations pouring in specifically for the Autism Support Fund. Pemberton stayed. He restructured the foundation around a new mission, supporting artists who'd sacrificed for their families. Single parents, caregivers, people who'd chosen love over recognition. He named it after his daughter, the Claire Pemberton Memorial Fund. He and Marcus met for coffee once a month, not business. Just two fathers talking about loss and love and the weight of doing your best when your best never feels like enough. 6 months later, Marcus and Ilya sat in the Seattle Symphony Hall. The audience filled the space, voices humming with anticipation. Tonight's program included Song for the Unheard. It had been performed 12 times since the gala, requested everywhere. Ilya sat beside his father. Small for his age, dark hair, brown eyes. He wore his noise-canceling headphones. His hands rested in his lap. Marcus had prepared him all week. New place, new sounds. But familiar music. The symphony began. Other pieces first. Ilya sat quietly, eyes closed, listening. Marcus watched him, watched the way his son's head tilted slightly when the strings came in, the way his fingers twitched during rhythmic passages. Then the conductor announced the final piece. Song for the Unheard. The hall quieted. The orchestra began. The melody Marcus had hummed in the rain filled the space. Simple at first, then complex, then broken apart, then rebuilt. Ilya's eyes stayed closed. But Marcus saw his son's lips moving, humming along. So quiet only Marcus could hear it. The piece moved into its final movement, building toward the climax. Every instrument layering on top of each other, tension rising. Marcus remembered conducting it, remembered the feeling of pulling that sound from the orchestra, of hearing Ilya's voice amplified through 70 instruments. Then it came, the resolution. Everything dropping away until only the cello remained. Playing the melody alone, simple, unadorned, a child's voice reaching for his father. The final note held. Then faded. Silence. Ilya's eyes opened. He turned his head, looked directly at Marcus. His lips moved. He took a breath. Dada music. 2 words. Clear. Deliberate. The first 2-word phrase he'd ever spoken. Marcus's breath caught. His vision blurred. He pulled Ilya close. His son leaned into him the same way he had that night in the rain. "Yes," Marcus whispered, his accent thick with emotion. Dada's music. The audience applauded. People rose. But around Marcus and Ilya, a small circle of awareness formed. People noticed the father holding his son, noticed the tears on Marcus's face. They turned away slightly, gave them space, gave them this moment of private grace in a public place. The applause faded. The crowd began to leave. Marcus and Ilya stayed seated, waiting for the rush to pass. Finally, they stood. Marcus took Ilya's hand. They walked up the aisle together, past the rows of empty seats, past the lobby with its high ceiling and glittering chandeliers, out into the night. The city glowed around them. Car lights, street lights, the Space Needle rising against the dark sky. Seattle on a Tuesday evening. Ordinary and beautiful. Marcus looked down at his son. Ilya's small hand was warm in his. The boy hummed quietly as they walked. The melody. Their melody. Their melody 6 years ago, Marcus had stood in a Moscow airport with a 7-month-old baby and a single suitcase. He'd left behind his career, his family, his name. He'd left behind everything he'd worked for. Everything people told him defined him. He'd made that choice again every day since, every early morning making rice and carrots, every double shift washing dishes, every night humming in the dark when Ilya couldn't sleep. Every moment he'd chosen his son over the world's definition of success. And now, walking through the Seattle night with Ilya's hand in his, Marcus finally understood what his father in Moscow had never been able to see, what his wife had never been willing to accept, what the world tried so hard to deny. True wealth isn't measured by what we build. It's measured by what we protect when the world tells us to let go. Marcus and Ilya reached the bus stop. They sat on the bench together. Ilya leaned against his father's side. Marcus wrapped his arm around his son. The bus came. They climbed on, found seats near the back, and as the city rolled past the windows, Marcus hummed softly. Ilya hummed with him. Two voices, harmony, connection, everything that mattered, held in the space between two notes.